1. Maria Vasilyevna Oktyabrskaya, Soviet Union. The Fighting Girlfriend. January 17, 1944. The forests of Belarus were burning under German artillery fire. A Soviet T-34 tank sat crippled with smoke curling from its armor. Suddenly, a hatch burst open, and a woman climbed out. Not to escape, but instead to repair her tank under a rain of bullets. But she wasn't supposed to be in the middle of a war. 2 years before, Maria was evacuated to the Siberian city of Tomsk following the start of the German invasion of the Soviet Union, popularly referred to as Operation Barbarossa. The Germans had her little Ukrainian village destroyed, and there was no other option but evacuation. Like most Soviet women of her generation, her life revolved around duty to the country. She went on to marry a Soviet officer, Ilya Oktyabrski. It was a thing of pride being a Soviet soldier's wife. But constant dread for the unknown also accompanied this prestige. For 2 years, Maria heard nothing from her husband, who had been sent to the front. Until one fateful day, Maria got the news that her husband was among the soldiers killed by the Nazis. For most people, that would have been the end of the story, but not Maria. Instead of mourning quietly, she sought revenge. Without money, she was helpless, and so she took up sewing, sold bed linens, and every other possession to raise money. She wrote a letter to the General Secretary of the Soviet Union, Joseph Stalin, and demanded that the money be used to build a tank, but on 2 conditions. First, that she would drive it herself, and second, that the tank be named Fighting Girlfriend. The Soviets understood the power of symbolism. A grieving wife turned avenger was the perfect weapon for propaganda. Stalin approved her request, largely for its propaganda value, and the tank was built and named. She began her training, overcoming all the hurdles that came her way, and in just 5 months, she was free to carry out her mission. In September 1943, she joined the 26th Guards Tank Brigade and was eventually given command of her own T-34, the Fighting Girlfriend. When she got to the battlefield, she became more than just a symbol. Witnesses described her as formidable, almost reckless, and not someone to be trifled with. Maria Oktyabrskaya's first tank battle took place on October 21, 1943, near the city of Smolensk. Her tank, the Fighting Girlfriend, was reported to be the first to breach enemy lines and successfully destroy several German artillery guns and machine gun nests. It was during this battle that she first disregarded orders to remain in place when her tank was hit. According to combat reports, she leapt out with the tools for repairs, tightened the bolts, patched damage, and jumped right into the tank, ignoring the hail of fire around her. Her rage made her unstoppable and impulsive. She was sent again to fight in the freezing January battle. The Fighting Girlfriend managed to destroy 3 German war machines and disrupt many German positions. And like clockwork, her T-34 was hit. True to form, she climbed out to repair it as the war raged around her. But this time, she was not so lucky. A German shrapnel struck her head, and she collapsed in the snow. She was taken to the hospital but had lost a lot of blood. She died a few months later and was posthumously awarded the title of Hero of the Soviet Union. 2. Otto Carius, Germany. Born in the quiet German town of Zweibrücken, Otto Carius, like many young men of his time, was swept up in the tides of the Third Reich, volunteering for the Wehrmacht at just 18 years old. Initially, he was rejected for being underweight, but he was relentless and didn't give up until he was finally accepted in 1940. He began his military career on the Eastern Front in the infantry before volunteering for the Panzer Armored Branch. He experienced his first battle in June 1941 during Operation Barbarossa as a loader in the 21st Panzer Division, but fate had other plans. In 1943, Otto Carius was assigned to the formidable Panzerkampfwagen 6 Tiger, one of the most powerful tanks of the war. From that moment, his reputation grew as well as his experience with each battle. He became one of the youngest, most decorated officers and was even awarded the Knight's Cross, Oak Leaves, and Iron Cross Second and First Class for bravery on the battlefield. In early 1944, the ground was covered in snow and leaves had fallen off the trees. The Eastern Front, in the chilly weather, was shrouded in bitter silence near the Latvian village of Malin Nava. Two German Tiger I tanks stood with their engines silent, behind tree lines, watching and waiting. One of the tanks had Carius, the mastermind, in it. Confident in their victory in the war, the Soviet forces marched right into an ambush. Columns of Soviet armor, multiple heavy tanks, and a dozen T-34s, including Stalin's prized IS-2 tanks, were destroyed in less than 24 hours. Carius's tactical genius lay not only in marksmanship, but in his ability to outthink his opponents, using terrain, camouflage, and patience to devastating effect. Considered a Panzer ace, he's been credited with destroying more than 150 enemy tanks. However, during an interview, he claimed a lower number, only counting kills as a gunner. In July 1944, while on a reconnaissance mission ahead of his tanks in a motorcycle and sidecar, he and his driver were ambushed by Soviet troops. Carius was severely wounded, suffering shots through the leg and arm, 4 bullets in the back and 1 through the neck. After recovering from his wounds, he was transferred to the newly created 512th Heavy Anti-Tank Battalion in August 1944, and there he commanded a company of Jagdtiger tank destroyers. He fought with the Jagdtigers on the Western Front in 1945, including in the Ruhr Pocket, before surrendering to the U.S. Army in April 1945. After the war, Carius studied pharmacology at Heidelberg University. He opened a pharmacy called the Tiger Apotheke as a tribute to the Tiger tank, which he ran until his retirement in 2011. He authored a book about his wartime experiences called Tigers in the Mud, which was released in 1960. While Carius moved stealthily against his enemy, Germany had another commander who was exactly the opposite. He was loud, ruthless, and turned into a living myth by the Nazi propaganda machine. 3. Michael Wittmann, Germany. Nicknamed the Black Baron, Michael Wittmann was credited with the destruction of approximately 138 enemy tanks, plus a large number of anti-tank guns and other armored vehicles. This makes him one of the highest-scoring tank aces of all time. One of his famous actions was at the Villers-Bocage, France, on June 13, 1944. He laid an ambush with a German Tiger-borne tank. Within 15 minutes, an entire British column consisting of armored vehicles, tanks, and anti-tank guns was completely obliterated. Although one of the most famous Panzer aces, Wittmann had a humble beginning. Born on the 22nd of April, 1914, Michael Wittmann grew up in the town of Vogeltal in Bavaria on a farm. He worked on the farm alongside his brother and 3 sisters. In 1934, Wittmann left the farm for the Freiwillige Arbeitsdienst, which was basically the volunteer labor service. It was during his time volunteering that he found his calling. At the end of 1934, Wittmann signed up for 2 years in the Army. It was during his training with the regiment that Wittmann encountered something that would change his life: the Panzer. For the first time, he laid eyes on the Panzer Kampfwagen I. Wittmann was captivated instantly. Having grown up around farm machinery, he knew his way around engines and tools. But compared to tractors and harvesters, the Panzer was something else entirely. From that moment on, Wittmann's path was set. He was so fascinated with the Panzer I that it would define his future. After completing his initial service, he pursued further training. He aimed to get as close to the armored vehicles as possible. By 1936, Wittmann had been transferred into the 17th Infantry Regiment, and his impressive record pushed him further toward his dream. A year later, Wittmann found his way into the newly formed Panzer divisions of the German Army. It was here that he got formal training as a tank crewman, learning how to drive, fire, maintain, and command these machines. When World War II began in September 1939, Wittmann was no longer a young soldier filled with curiosity. He was now a fully qualified tank operator assigned to the elite 1st SS Panzer Division, Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler. With them by his side, he marched into Poland, France, even toward the Soviet Union, where he fought the famous Battle of Kursk, also known as Operation Citadel. Kursk was the largest tank battle in history, involving a massive concentration of German and Soviet armored vehicles, with combined forces reaching over 6,000 tanks and assault guns over the course of the battle. For many of the German tank crews, it was a nightmare. The once untouchable panzers faced wave after wave of Soviet T-34s and heavily armored KVI tanks. But for Wittmann, it was an opportunity to prove his loyalty to the Nazi. Operating with the feared Tiger I, he positioned his tank strategically and in no time, aggressively began shooting at the Soviet soldiers with its devastating 88mm gun, while its thick armor protected him from direct hits. In the battles following Kursk, Wittmann's kill count soared as well as his reputation. Column after column of Soviet armor was destroyed due to his tactical ambushes and counterattacks. By the summer of 1943, he was no longer regarded as just another tank officer. He'd become a legend. However, his quick rise to fame came at a dire cost. On the 8th of August, 1944, barely 2 months after his victory at the Villers-Bocage, his luck ran out. As a constant pain to the Allied forces, he was sought out during the Battle of Saint-Aignan-de-Comesnil. Unaware he was being hunted, he moved towards the British and Canadian forces. They were well aware of his reputation, and by noon, an opportunity presented itself when Wittmann's Tiger was spotted alone in the open. In less than 1 minute, shells were thrown towards him, ripping through his vehicle, detonating its ammunition. The Tiger I exploded so violently that the turret was blown out of the tank completely. Wittmann and his entire crew were killed instantly. For years, debate raged about who fired the fatal shot. Some claimed it was a Sherman Firefly from the British Northamptonshire Yeomanry. Others believed it was Canadian armor. Regardless, the outcome was the same. The man who had terrorized Allied tankers was gone. Michael Wittmann died inside a tank, in the heat of battle, and his death not only ended his personal myth, but also the aura of invincibility surrounding the German Tiger. But Wittmann wasn't the only German tank ace whose reputation reached mythical proportions. 4. Kurt Knispel, Germany. If Wittmann was the face of propaganda, Kurt Knispel was the hidden giant, far deadlier. But despite his 168 tank kills, he remains less celebrated. Why? Kurt Knispel was unruly, unpredictable, and often at odds with authority. The SS considered him too wild. He often got into fistfights with his own comrades and openly defied orders. Yet they kept him in ranks because no one could argue with his results on the battlefield. On one occasion, he was reported to have assaulted an Einsatzgruppen officer in Krakow. This act alone would have seen most soldiers executed. However, because of his unrivaled skill and bravery on the battlefield, the military considered him too valuable to remove from the front line, and so all of his antics were ignored. He started his basic training at the Panzer Replacement Training Battalion in Sagan. He mastered the Panzer I, II, and IV efficiently, and in no time, he was transferred to Putlos in Germany for more specialized training. His first deployment was to the 3rd Company of the 29th Panzer Regiment, 12th Panzer Division, and he first saw action during Operation Barbarossa on the Eastern Front in 1941. It was nothing like his training with fire raining down and endless lines of Soviet armor. Nevertheless, he adapted quickly. At first, he served as a gunner on the Panzer IV. It was here that his natural eye for distance, speed, and movement was exposed. He could estimate range, and his accuracy under pressure set him apart from his peers. It was during Operation Barbarossa that he scored his first confirmed tank kills, saving his crews from destruction. The war grew bloodier, and by 1943, the Germans were already playing their last cards in hopes that the tide would change. Kurt Knispel and his unit, the 503rd Heavy Panzer Battalion, were among those sent to the war front in what would be the largest tank battle in history and arguably the fiercest tank combat of the entire war. The Battle of Kursk, 1943, also known as Operation Citadel, happened in the ruins of Moravia, just a few days before the fall of Berlin. There he took his final stand. Knispel rode his Tiger II tank into battle like he's always done. But just like Wittmann, his end was violent. His impenetrable tank proved to be vulnerable, and although he was pulled out from the wreckage, he succumbed to his wounds shortly afterwards in a field hospital in Verbevec. He was buried in a mass grave and was forgotten for decades. Only in recent years has his name resurfaced, and he's finally gained recognition for his actions during the war. 5. Dmitry Lavrinenko, Soviet Union. What comes to mind when tank aces are mentioned are usually the German tank aces like Wittmann and Knispel. However, the Germans were not the only ones with excellent tank aces. Dmitry Lavrinenko was widely regarded as the Soviet Union's most successful tank ace and hero. Born in 1914 in the mountain region of Russia, Lavrinenko began his military career as a young officer in 1934, just before the outbreak of World War II. A year later, he joined the Ulyanovsk Tank Training School. He was nicknamed Sniper Eye for his marksmanship with all types of weapons during his training. Graduating as a young lieutenant in 1938, Lavrinenko was no different from his crew on the battlefield. He was part of the Soviet war campaign in Poland in 1939. A year later, he again joined the Soviet campaign in Bessarabia in 1940. At the start of the war, he and his men were stationed at Stanislav, a village in western Ukraine, but he was quickly transferred to the 4th Tank Brigade, which played a crucial role in the defense of Moscow. His story changed on October 6 during the battle close to a village called Mtsensk. Dmitry Lavrinenko was assigned to a T-34 medium tank, the workhorse of the Red Army. With his truck, he and his crew members took a convoy of the Germans from the 4th Division by surprise. The Germans had surrounded a motorized rifle battalion and mortar section, resulting in several casualties. Dmitry Lavrinenko opened fire on the panzers, and instead of fighting cautiously, the daredevil launched lightning-fast assaults that often bordered on suicidal. Charging directly at the German formation, he used the speed and maneuverability of the T-34 to strike at close range, while the heavier German panzers had difficulty responding. In just a few months of combat, Lavrinenko had destroyed 52 German tanks, more than any other Soviet tanker in such a short period of time. His attacks were often devastating to the opposition and left no room for retreat. His crew saw every mission as his last, but he always came out victorious with increased tank kills. He destroyed hundreds of German machines and was the perfect tool for Soviet propaganda, showing the true courage of the Red Army. During a battle in December 1941, near Volokholamsk, he was struck by shrapnel from a German mortar and died on the spot. His budding career was tragically cut short at just 27 years old. He's remembered to this day as the most successful of all Soviet tank aces. 6. Bruce C. Clark. While Soviet tank commanders like Dmitry Lavrinenko relied on aggressive and fearless tactics on the battlefield, Bruce C. Clark relied on discipline, tactics, and his training. Clark enlisted in the Army in 1917, serving as a private in the Coast Artillery Corps during World War I before being discharged. He went on to join the New York National Guard on January 5, 1920, from which he gained an appointment to West Point. By the time the U.S. joined the war in 1941, it was already established that Clark was a thinker and master of strategy. He believed the tanks, with the right strategy, would be unstoppable. Clark first made his mark in 1944 during the Battle of the Bulge in St. Vith. The Germans launched a surprisingly offensive attack. Clark and his men were not prepared. They were also greatly outnumbered by German troops. The city was defended by the hapless 106th Infantry Division. Without the town of St. Vith, the war would be in the Germans' favor. The entire German offensive relied on supply routing through St. Vith for 2 whole panzer armies. Those 2 armies had attacked the ill-equipped division, commanded by Major Alan Jones. As a result, 2 units, the 422nd and 423rd Infantry Regiments, were surrounded, and Clark was sent to help. Since they were outnumbered, his focus shifted from fighting back to immediately repelling the Germans with tactics. The Battle of the Bulge was one of his finest moments. Throughout the night, Clark directed the unit into St. Vith. The next day, Clark charged against the Germans fearlessly, using the best tactics at his disposal. The worst thing, according to Clark, when chasing the enemy was to stop. He strongly believed that the safest place to be in combat is the enemy backfield. They're going to solve that problem for you by getting the hell out of there. And so they struck the Germans at critical points, fell back, re-strategized, and fought again. This went on for days, and his refusal to give up on the town managed to delay the German advancements and buy the Allied forces some time. However, Clark's influence went far beyond a single battle. He commanded major units during World War II, the Korean War, and the Cold War. In Korea, he fought through the cold mountains, rallying exhausted troops and steadying the front lines against several waves of attacks. By the Cold War, he was no longer a battlefield commander. He was now in charge of shaping NATO's armored doctrine, preparing the Western armies against the Soviet invasion. The war ended, but Bruce Clark's bravery was not forgotten. He gained recognition not only as a battlefield commander, but also as a master strategist whose methods defined U.S. tank strategy for decades. 7. Guy Sager, France/Germany. Unlike other aces, who racked up kills and glory, Sager's forgotten story, now brought to the limelight, was about a man caught up in the unforgiving machinery of conflict. Sager's story began not in Germany, but in France. He was born to a German father and a French mother in the town of Alsace. World War II began in 1939, and by 1940, the town was already conquered by Hitler's Germany. Now under the German rule, the town was subject to conscription, and probably compelled by a yearning for adventure, or perhaps forced to fight for the Germans, Guy was thrown into the German armed forces. Shortly, he found himself marching to war for the Third Reich. His destination was the Eastern Front, and he joined not just any unit, but the elite Grossdeutschland Division, which was the most formidable and bloodthirsty Panzergrenadier Division. Guy, alongside his unit, was sent up to the frozen hellscape of the Eastern Front. There, he witnessed violent tank battles, with metals and bodies being ripped apart and fire raining down like hail. In his memoir, The Forgotten Soldier, Sager described endless retreats, mud-swallowing vehicles whole, comrades frozen stiff in their foxholes, and the Soviets crushing everything and anyone in their path. Although he participated in epic, devastating tank battles on the Eastern Front, he was not always in a tank as a Panzer Grenadier. However, his fate was linked with theirs. He went on to witness one of the biggest battles at Kursk, as well as the desperate retreat through frozen wastes. In the end, all he wanted was for the war to end. Not glory, not victory, not even a medal for heroism, just how not to lose his mind before the war ends. 8. Crews of the Finnish B-T and T-34s, Finland/Soviet front. When Finland joined the war, it had 0 tanks of its own. What the Finns did instead was capture Soviet machines, repair them, and turn them against their former owners. The Soviet Union invaded Finland in September 1939, shortly after the start of World War II. Finland, with no other support, defended its country alone. At first, they fought with Molotov's cocktails, but soon realized the only way to win against the invaders was to take their prized weapons from them, the BT tanks and T tanks. When the Winter War ended in March 1940, with the signing of the Moscow Peace Treaty, the Finns knew this was just for a while. They collected every single piece of armor they could salvage, ready for the invaders. In 1941, when the Continuation War started, the Soviets came riding into Finland. This time, they were in for a surprise. The Ghost Division, commanded by Lieutenant Reino Levislaiho, rose into battle for Finland. The sights of Finnish soldiers climbing into the freshly stolen and already repainted armored tanks were both desperate and defiant. These crews knew the machines in and out, as they had salvaged all the parts from smoking battlefields and put all the pieces together themselves. Against the seemingly never-ending Soviet troops, the Finns fought like wolves, striking, retreating to re-strategize and striking again. The captured tanks, although few, dealt critical blows, and their presence on the battlefield became a constant reminder of Finnish resilience and resourcefulness. Although they fought valiantly, they were eventually outgunned by the Soviets. 9. Pierre Bilout, France. On the other side of the war was Pierre Bilout, a very audacious man. The German blitzkrieg had the French military cowering in defeat. The world watched in shock as the Panzerwaffe tore through their lines. Only one man saw a fighting chance and took it. May 16, 1940, during the Battle of Stone, Bilout led his Char Bwin Bis tank, called the Ur, against the Germans. He took the Germans unaware with his tactics, destroying 13 German tanks, 2 anti-tank guns, and countless infantry in a single charge. The French tank ace was hit 140 times, and not a single one penetrated, shocking the Panzer Division. The French soldiers proudly watched as their comrades successfully reclaimed Stone for France, even though it was for a day. 10. Alexandra Boyko, Soviet Union. Few stories captured the fury of the Soviet people like that of Alexandra Boyko. Alexandra started out her life as a chemist, alongside her husband, Ivan Boyko. Out of nowhere, they made a choice that shocked the nation. Emptying their life savings of about 50,000 rubles, the Boykos decided to dedicate it to constructing an impressive war tank, provided they get to be part of the crew. They were just like Maria Vasilyevna Oktyabrskaya all over again. A year after their huge donation, they both graduated from an accelerated program at the Chelyabinsk Tank School. They received their battle machine, a powerful IS-2 heavy tank, in 1944. Alexandra was appointed junior lieutenant, while her husband became the senior driver mechanic. This couple of crew was a rare occurrence, with Alexandra being the only woman recorded to have commanded a heavy tank as powerful as an IS-2. Their mission on the battlefield was simple: vengeance for their motherland. The Boykos rode their tank into the fierce Riggs offensive in 1944 and immediately got to work destroying the Germans. The official reports were astounding. Barely 2 weeks after fighting against the Germans, the Boykos had successfully destroyed 5 enemy tanks and 2 enemy guns. Stalin was impressed, and for bravery, Alexandra was awarded the prestigious Order of the Patriotic War, First Class, and went on to grace the back cover of the magazine, Ogoniok, as a hero to millions. 11. Sidney Valpy Radley Walters, Canada. The Boykos, although very brave, were not the only ones against the Nazis. Canada's very own Hunter sought out the downfall of the Nazis. Sidney Valpy Radley Walters, nicknamed Rad, was Canada's top tank destroyer. With a total count of 18 German tanks, Radley Walters earned the title of the Western Allies' Ace of Aces. Unlike many tank commanders, famous for their sheer destruction on the battlefield, Radley Walters became famous for a particular kill during the battle in Normandy in August 1944. He was credited with destroying the Tiger tank of none other than Michael Whitman. Although some credit a British Firefly crew, the weight of evidence suggests that Whitman was knocked out by an ambush fired upon by Radley Walters' squadron. Regardless of the exact shell, Rad had commanded the tank formation that eliminated the most feared armored legend. For the Allies, it was not just another tank destroyed on the battlefield. It was proof that the Nazis could be defeated. By war's end, Walters was credited with destroying more than 15 German tanks. However, he was celebrated mostly for ending the invincibility surrounding the Nazi legends. Radley Walters was awarded the Military Cross and the Distinguished Service Order for his exceptional courage and leadership. But as the Canadians fought for Caen, another armored legend was carving his own path through France, leading the charge for the U.S. Third Army. 12. Creighton Abrams, USA. This commander was the spearhead of General George S. Patton's blitzkrieg. His reputation was so fearsome that his commanding general called him the world's best. Creighton Abrams' style wasn't flashy. He didn't need to be. He showed his confidence on the battlefield. Abrams's military career began in 1936 after he graduated from the U.S. Military Academy. He was immediately commissioned as a second lieutenant and served with the 1st Cavalry Division from 1936 to 1940. He was first promoted to first lieutenant in 1939 and later to temporary captain in 1940. His defining moment came in late December 1944 during the Battle of the Bulge. Abrams was given command of a specialized task force. Christmas Eve, right after the assembled units were set to go, General Patton gave him an order: drive like hell. Abrams put his tanks through a 3-day wild drive through heavy snow and ice. Arriving on December 26th, his forces broke through the German resistance, linking up with the besieged paratroopers. He was eventually awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for his heroism. Abrams survived the war with 12 confirmed kills without ever getting a tank shot out under him. And as a brilliant battalion commander of the 37th Tank Battalion, his entire battalion was credited with destroying hundreds of German vehicles and artillery pieces. He continued to lead armored units through the Cold War, and in the late 1960s, he took command of all U.S. forces in the Vietnam War, succeeding General Westmoreland. 13. George S. Patton, USA. General George S. Patton commanded the counterattack that foiled the last desperate gamble of Hitler's army at the Battle of the Bulge. Although he's considered one of the famous and influential generals of the 20th century, his role in armored warfare is unique. He started in the cavalry and was the first officer to be assigned to the U.S. Tank Corps in 1917. For decades between wars, he championed the doctrine of rapid, mechanized warfare. His philosophy was simple: aggression, speed, the offensive. His doctrine later defined the course of American success in World War II. When the U.S. entered the war, Patton commanded the 2nd Armored Division, which he forged into a powerful fighting force he would later use to conquer Europe. What made Patton disturbing and admired by his men was his relentlessness. He pushed his men and machine to the extreme, just like he did with Creighton Abrams's 4th Armored Division. His speeches were brutal, filled with fury and raw belief in victory. He was considered a genius as well as a reckless and unhinged soldier. Although not credited with any personal tank kill, his ideology pioneered the destruction of entire German divisions and the capture of hundreds of thousands of prisoners. 14. Ernst Bachmann, Germany. The strategic vision of a general like Patton was pitted against the skill of individual enemy soldiers. Across the lines, Germany relied heavily on tank aces like Ernst Bachmann to stem the tide of Allied armored forces. He was one of Germany's dreaded tank commanders who laid an ambush that destroyed dozens of Allied tanks. Bachmann was repairing his single Panther tank, often numbered 424, near a French village of Le Loiret, when he got news of a massive column of American tanks advancing down a road. He quickly positioned his Panther at a crossroad corner, which became known as Bachmann's Corner. Utilizing the Panther's superior 7.5-centimeter KWK 42L70 gun and its thick frontal armor, he engaged the column at close range. Bachmann and his Panther disabled the lead and trail tanks, effectively trapping the entire column. He destroyed 9 to 14 U.S. Sherman tanks and numerous vehicles before withdrawing. He destroyed many tanks in just one day, but that was not the only time he did so. June 14th, Bachmann was given orders to recover 4 Panthers that had been cut off behind enemy lines, and he succeeded, destroying 3 Sherman tanks belonging to the Allies. He was sent that same day to recover wounded German soldiers that had been captured by the American forces, and he succeeded. He was a thorn in the flesh for the Allies. Stories of Bachmann's Corner spread like wildfire among the Allied tank crews, and his reputation alone became a weapon, sowing caution in the minds of the Allied soldiers. 15. Zinoviev Kolobanov. It was the summer of 1941, and the German war machine seemed unstoppable. Hundreds of towns succumbed under the weight of the Panzer columns, but just outside Leningrad, one Soviet officer prepared a trap that would become one of the deadliest ambushes of the war. Major Zinoviev Kolobanov commanded 5 KV-1 heavy tanks. These powerful machines were so thickly armored with steel that the early German weapons could barely scratch them. He laid an ambush with his crew at strategic positions, overlooking the narrow approaches where the German armored tanks were expected to pass. When the first German column of about 20 tanks rolled into sight, he signaled for his men to hold. He patiently waited for the lead vehicles to move into the kill zone before opening fire. His first shot crippled the head of the column, and his second blocked the rear. There was no escape for the Germans. Kolobanov's KV-1 tanks unleashed round after round. Within minutes, the German tanks were destroyed. By the time they were done, 22 enemy tanks had become burning wrecks.